Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. I say another video, but this is actually the first video I'm putting out of the new season, and I'm basing it around the new rule and point system changes that FPL are putting in place for defensive players in the league and how we can maybe take that to our advantage by looking at how they compare from the data last season. I am trying to make my own graphics this season as well, or at least make more graphics and do some data wrangling. So hopefully if you find that useful, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video. It's all really appreciated and hopefully we can get off to a good start. So if you've not heard so far, what are the changes based on the rules? So it really comes down to defensive contributions. So any defender who reaches a combined total of 10 clearances, blocks, interceptions, and tackles per game gets 2 extra points. Now, you can also include midfielders in this, but midfielders also need to have ball recoveries included in their metrics, and they need to make a total of 12 of those 5 metrics per game in order to get 2 extra points. So we will also do a video on just midfielders. This video actually covers all players, yeah, including strikers in some cases, because I think that's important just for comparison purposes. I did want to look at each of these metrics separately and did look at player totals for last season for players who played at least 2,500 minutes. So that is around 25 games per season. Otherwise, the graphs would have just been so big. So these are players who also made at least 100 clearances because, again, I wanted to cap it at some point so we could just have the top players for each metric. And as we can see, there's some really interesting players here. Players like Mario and Milenkovic, who played for a good defensive team in Nottingham Forest, could have potentially got even more points through their defensive contributions, ranking quite highly on clearances. Now, clearances was the most of any of these 4 metrics that accrued last season. So players made more clearances than they did blocks, interceptions, and tackles. And I think that's really important when you're considering which players to get in because these are the ones where you can have the highest proportion of your 10 um, metrics combined made up from just clearances. So players like Nathan Collins as well is worth considering because he is someone who I think got 7 assists last season from centre back, and although we don't know, how Brentford are going to be with all the departures, he is someone who's worth bearing in mind. And then you've still got the classic players from Everton like Tarkowski and Branthwaite, as well as um, Crystal Palace with players like Lacroix or Mark Gahey. Think as well when we're looking at tackles, cap that at 65. Now, players are making less tackles than clearances, but this is an interesting metric to look at because it does include midfielders, or midfielders were included in clearances, but they just weren't making as many as centre backs. Here we can see that midfielders are making just as many clearances as anyone else, with Idrissa Gueye, Jack Gomez, Caicedo, McAllister, Elliot Anderson, all featuring inside the top 10. And I think it does bear in mind that tackles was the second highest metric out of all 4 that we're looking at today. I think another interesting aspect is that someone like Daniel Munoz features on this list in second place. Now, he is someone who you would think of as an attacking fullback, and you'd get him in FPL for those attacking returns. If he's able to potentially offer some points on the other side of this as well, then I think he's going to be a much more of a certain pick in a lot of FPL teams. It's also important to acknowledge that we don't know quite how the overall bonus point system is going to work this season yet. If FPL are placing more emphasis on things like tackles, therefore the players who are making a lot of tackles can add to their overall bonus point system as well as potentially get these 2 extra points from the defensive side. So I think that really makes Daniel Munoz a really interesting pick. So we're going to move on to interceptions, and these are players who made at least 25 interceptions. And it's really interesting to see some forward players on this list. So players like Semenyo, Judos, Vardy, Liam Delap. If you've got a striker in your fantasy league team from a team who presses quite highly and is able to get some interceptions, these players aren't going to get you those 2 defensive bonus points based on interceptions alone. If they're getting interceptions and FPL are ranking those more highly, I think then that could play into the overall bonus point system and make those players a tiny bit more valuable than what they would have been last season. Although someone like Aaron Wan-Bissaka, let's say he's making 60 or just over 60 interceptions per game and ranks top of this, it is important to check how he does in these other metrics as well, because 60 interceptions per game is probably about one or two per game. So he's not going to get you those two defensive points. But what he could do if he ranks highly on the other charts is maybe combine that with the other metrics. Think the same could be said for blocks. Like these players made at least 10 blocks and across the whole season, and these were the top players. Interestingly enough, Morgan Rogers ranked first in terms of blocks. So whilst he's only averaging one block per game, and he's not going to get you those two defensive points, I think it does make him more appealing overall, like we say, when it comes into the emphasis on the overall bonus points system. We can see some players that are featured already on here, players like Wan-Bissaka, as well as Idrissa Gueye. We also see Haaland and Visser on here as well, which is also, I just think, really interesting because you would associate blocks with defenders like Dan Burn and Collins. Having players who are higher up the pitch getting these as well might just create an extra avenue. So I think it's also important to look at these in totals. So these are the top 20 Premier League players based on these defensive totals for last season. And we can see that Lacroix comes out top. Mario, Milenkovic, Nathan Collins, Tarkowski are all in the top five. And I think one thing that we need to bear in mind here is that these players have featured across multiple graphs. I would much rather have a defender who features in the top 10 or top 20 across all four metrics than a player who finishes in the top one or two in just one metric, because you're very unlikely to get 10 defensive contributions with just one metric alone. You need to try and add those up. So don't necessarily just look at the top of these charts. Look at unless it's this one, of course, but look at the ones who are maybe in the middle somewhere, but feature across a few different ones. So, these defenders at the top of this, it's not really much of a surprise. But I think it's also important to look at the players per who are doing well per game, because these could be potential undervalued players. And I think, you can see here that Cameron Burgess from Ipswich last season actually ranked top in the whole league on these defensive actions per game. He just didn't play many games. So if he was someone who did start more, in the league, he could have been someone had this rule been in place that you could really take advantage of. What we do see is someone like Lacroix, Tarkowski, Murillo featuring quite highly. Now, these are the players that you do want to consider. Players who are playing regularly, also averaging quite a high amount of defensive actions per game. Lacroix averaging about 10 of these each game means he's probably going to get two extra points for every game he plays. If he's playing over 30 games a season, it's quite a lot of points. Think it's also relevant to suggest maybe looking at players from a newly promoted side as well, such as someone from Burnley who set a lot of records in the Championship last season for their defensive abilities. I think that's someone who you could have as your fourth or fifth defender, as well as players who just play for quite good defensive teams. So for me, the teams who have shown up time and time again here are your Nottingham Forest, your Everton, your Palace, and then I'd maybe also look at the newly promoted teams as well. So hopefully that's helped you out with just some overall thoughts to begin the new season. If it has, please do like and subscribe. It's really appreciated, and hopefully we can get off to a really good start this season. Like I say, I'm hoping to put videos out, every other day, maybe two every 3 days, just to look at the data as well and try and create my own visuals that will maybe help you as well. Just try and take the channel to the next step. So thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.